On a humid afternoon in Atlanta, an elderly woman clutching thousands of dollars faces a cruel betrayal that will change her life forever. What happens next reveals the hidden battles fought in the shadows and the unstoppable power of a son's love and justice. That afternoon, the sky above Atlanta sagged beneath a blanket of thick, brooding clouds, casting the city in a gray that felt more like warning than weather. The air was hot and heavy, as if grief itself had settled across the streets. Martha Cole, a 70-year-old black woman whose life had been carved by hardship and quiet endurance, stepped out of the Wells Fargo bag clutching a faded cloth bag to her chest. Her silver-white hair, fine as cotton strands, framed a face lined with the weight of years. Years filled with work, loss, and waiting. Inside that worn bag rested her lifeline. $4,200 in carefully saved cash. Every penny had come slowly, collected from cleaning jobs, sewing for neighbors, skipping meals. It was the sum she'd spent a lifetime saving, not for comfort, not for luxury, but for a single urgent goal: heart surgery. Her health had been quietly slipping from her for years, her heartbeat faltering like a clock winding down. But Martha had never stopped moving forward. She couldn't afford to. Not when her son Elijah was still out there, serving his country across the ocean. He was the reason she kept going. Her breath may have shortened, but her love for him never did. Now, at long last, the hospital had scheduled her procedure for the following week. This money would buy her time, maybe not forever, but enough to hold her son again, to sit in the sunshine without pain, to live a little without fear. Her hands trembled with a fragile hope as she made her way through the narrow side alley that led home. Fewer people walked here. It was quieter. Too quiet. Suddenly a screech cut through the silence, the sharp, jarring cry of tires slamming against asphalt. Martha froze. A police cruiser tore into the alley like a predator that had finally spotted its prey. Her heart, already fragile, thudded violently in her chest. The vehicle skidded to a stop just feet away, its engine rumbling like a threat. The door flung open, and two officers stepped out. The first was Officer Travis Greggs, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose smirk revealed more cruelty than authority. His eyes were cold, scanning Martha with the detached arrogance of someone who thought himself untouchable. The second, Officer Ethan O'Reilly, leaned lazily against the squad car, wiry and watchful, his eyes darting around like he was sizing up a kill. Greggs sauntered forward, his boots echoing against the alley walls. "You just walked out of the bank with a fat stack of cash, didn't you?" he said, his voice coated in disdain. Martha's fingers tightened around the bag instinctively. "It's my money," she said, her voice steady though her body shook. "I saved it. For surgery. For my heart." Greggs laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "Heart surgery? From where I'm standing, an old black woman carrying that much cash sounds like a scam." His tone wasn't a question, it was an accusation. Martha stepped back, her voice cracked. "Please, I worked for it, every cent. I can prove it." But Greggs wasn't interested in proof. He wasn't here for justice. With a sudden, brutal motion, he ripped the bag from her hands. Martha staggered, barely staying on her feet, as he held the bag up like a trophy. "The law gives us the right to seize suspicious funds," he said smugly, spitting out the phrase civil asset forfeiture like it was scripture. "And this? This looks mighty suspicious." Martha's mouth parted in disbelief. "You can't. I've done nothing wrong." Greggs only shrugged. "Then prove it, but I don't believe a damn word from someone like you." He pulled a handful of bills from the bag, crushed them in his fist, and tossed them to the ground at her feet. "Here," he said with mock generosity, "buy yourself a coffin. Call it a favor from the state." O'Reilly chuckled darkly. "Lady, we're doing society a favor. You think having cash gives you power? We decide who gets to keep it." The squad car revved, spun, and sped off, leaving Martha small and shattered on the cold concrete. The torn bills scattered around her like fallen leaves, worthless in the wind. No one stepped out from the nearby buildings. No one offered help. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. For years, she had refused to call her son while he was deployed. She didn't want to distract him from the dangers of war, but now she had no choice. Her voice cracked as the line connected. "Elijah," she whispered, the first tear slipping free. "Baby, I need you." Thousands of miles away, under the searing sun of a distant desert, Elijah Cole sat in the back of a military transport truck. Dust clung to his uniform, sweat streaked his brow. His mind was already halfway home. This was his last mission before he could finally return to Atlanta. Elijah sat motionless, eyes locked on the horizon as the desert winds stirred faint trails of sand around him. War had forged him into something more than a soldier. It had taught him control. The discipline to remain calm when chaos erupted, to measure every breath when panic roared. Slowly, deliberately, he peeled the dust-covered gloves from his hands, folding them like a ritual. But the stillness cracked when his phone vibrated sharply in his palm. He glanced down. His heart skipped. His mother never called during duty hours. Something was wrong. "Mom," he answered, his voice even, but a shadow of dread had already entered his bones. "Elijah, I need you." Her voice trembled through the receiver, fragile and broken in a way he had never heard before. Not his mother. Not the strongest woman he knew. His spine straightened, jaw clenched, the muscles in his arm tensed as he gripped the phone tighter. "What happened?" "They took everything, Elijah." Her voice cracked like porcelain. "Every dollar I saved for my heart surgery, they just took it right in front of me." A silence, thick and dangerous, stretched across the line. Then came the fire. Elijah's breath slowed, but inside rage flared hot, not wild, not reckless, but precise. He didn't scream, he didn't curse. Instead, he shifted, mentally falling into the rhythm of tactical thinking. Years of training moved through him like muscle memory. "Who did this, Mom? Who took your money?" The words came out low, forced through gritted teeth. She hesitated. "The police," she whispered, as if saying it aloud made it real. "2 officers. Said I couldn't possibly have that kind of money. Said it was illegal. They just took it." That word, police, hit him like a strike to the chest. For a second, the rage paused, but only to sharpen its edge. He inhaled deeply, fingers gripping the phone until the plastic creaked beneath the pressure. This wasn't a foreign battlefield anymore. This wasn't about flags or politics or chains of command. This was Atlanta, his home, and someone had dared to violate the woman who raised him. He looked ahead at the other soldiers in the transport truck. His decision was made. "I'm coming home, Mom," he said softly. "I'll fix this." The call ended. For a moment Elijah sat still, centering his breath. His body was in the desert, but his soul was already gone, flying over oceans and mountains, back to the small, weathered house in Georgia, where dignity had been stolen in daylight. When the truck stopped, he didn't hesitate. He leapt down and strode directly toward the command tent. Inside, a young officer tapped away at a keyboard. Elijah approached with the authority of a man on a new mission. "I need immediate leave," he said, voice steel. "It's a family emergency." The officer looked up, then down, recognizing something in Elijah's tone that didn't require questions. "Understood," he replied, already processing the request. As minutes ticked by, Elijah sat motionless, but inside a storm gathered. This wasn't about money. It was about justice. It was about men who wore badges like armor while hiding their rot underneath. Travis Greggs and Ethan O'Reilly hadn't just stolen cash. They had declared war on the wrong mother. The officer returned. "Your flight leaves in 2 hours, Sergeant Cole." Elijah nodded, stood, and walked out without a word. He wasn't packing for home. He was preparing for war. As he gathered his gear, he barely noticed the familiar weight of his uniform or the sand crusted into the seams. None of that mattered now. He passed a cracked mirror and caught a glimpse of his reflection. Eyes steady, jaw tight, posture lethal. He didn't see a soldier. He saw a son on a mission. And Atlanta was about to meet a reckoning it never saw coming. By the time Elijah landed at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, the city lights blurred beneath a cold determination. No handshakes, no welcomes. He moved fast, driven by one goal: identify and dismantle the man who had stolen his mother's hope. Travis Griggs. The name pulsed like a siren in his mind. This wasn't about revenge. This was about clarity. To win any battle, you had to understand your enemy, how they moved, how they thought, where they hid. He rented a small room on the outskirts of the city. Quiet, out of sight, a soldier's nest. Under the soft blue light of a laptop screen, he worked through the night, every article, every report, every record with Greggs's name on it. Piece by piece, a profile began to form. And it was worse than he expected. Travis Greggs wasn't just a corrupt officer. He was a parasite in uniform, charming in public, venomous in private. His record looked clean, too clean. 38 years old, over a decade in the Atlanta Police Department, and not a single official complaint that stuck. But the patterns were there. Elijah recognized them like patterns in sand after a raid. Complaints mysteriously withdrawn, witnesses who changed their stories, surveillance tapes that disappeared. He knew the signs. Greggs had connections, protection. He had been operating unchecked, feeding on the powerless, knowing no one would ever come for him. But Elijah knew better than to trust a spotless record. Years spent inside military and law enforcement systems had taught him how those institutions shielded men like Travis Greggs from real accountability. Through old contacts, Elijah accessed a reliable inside source, and what he uncovered only hardened his resolve. Greggs had been investigated at least 3 times for excessive use of force. Each victim, without exception, a black civilian. Every one of those cases should have ended Greggs's career. Yet time and again, the charges vanished, dismissed mysteriously for lack of evidence. One incident stood out like a scar on the city's conscience. Greggs had beaten an unarmed black teenager unconscious, right in broad daylight, simply for allegedly looking at him the wrong way. Public outrage flared, voices rose, but the storm was swiftly buried beneath legal loopholes and a wall of bureaucratic silence. The deeper Elijah delved, the clearer a sinister pattern emerged. Greggs didn't just target people of color, he preyed on those least able to fight back. One file caught Elijah's eye. Years ago, Greggs had applied for the city's SWAT team, but he was eliminated early on, failing the physical endurance tests and tactical trials. A blunt rejection and a blow to his ego. But what made Greggs dangerous wasn't that failure. It was how he reacted. Greggs convinced himself he wasn't cut because the system was rigged against him, that minority applicants, especially military veterans like Elijah, benefiting from diversity initiatives, were favored over him. That belief festered, twisting his arrogance into something far darker. He became not just a corrupt cop, but a man consumed by resentment and grudges. To Greggs, men like Elijah weren't just competition. They were a living humiliation, a reminder of everything he felt he had lost. Elijah leaned back in his chair, breathing in slowly as the final pieces clicked into place. Greggs wasn't merely a thief who had stolen from his mother. He was the embodiment of a rotten system. A man who saw justice not as a sacred duty, but as a weapon to control, punish, and oppress those he deemed inferior. His cruelty wasn't random. It was calculated, deliberate, and fueled by years of festering rage. Outside, night gave way to the faint first light of dawn. Elijah stared out the window, knowing this wouldn't be an easy fight. He had faced ruthless enemies on distant battlefields. But this was different. Taking down a corrupt officer, protected by the very institution meant to hold him accountable, was a war of a different kind. One that demanded patience, precision, and iron resolve. He closed his laptop, his gaze settling on an old photograph of his mother. A rare smile lighting her face, warm and full of life. Her suffering would not be forgotten. Travis Greggs would soon learn that some men never back down, especially when the fight is for those they love. Travis Greggs. Elijah whispered, voice low and cold as ice. "Your time has come." As the sun broke through thin curtains, Elijah had no time to savor the morning's calm. The hunt had begun. This time, the predator would become the prey. After years on brutal battlefields, Elijah knew this fight would test him in new ways, not against distant enemies, but against those who wielded the law as a weapon in the very heart of Atlanta. Before stepping out, he glanced once more at his mother's photo and silently vowed, "Don't worry, Mom. They will pay for what they've done." Elijah headed straight to Zone 3 Police Precinct, the lair of Travis Greggs and Ethan O'Reilly. The moment he stepped into the front lobby, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. Eyes sharpened with curiosity, skepticism, and restrained excitement, all fixed on the stranger who dared to enter. Calm and unwavering, Elijah approached the front desk. His voice cut through the quiet, clear and firm. "I want to see Travis Greggs." The receptionist flinched, eyes darting nervously, but Elijah didn't repeat himself. Almost immediately, the door to the back office swung open. Out stepped Travis Greggs, a smug grin stretched across his face. He had been waiting for this moment, playing it like a predator stalking its prey. Every movement slow, deliberate, radiating the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. "Specialist Cole?" Greggs taunted, voice dripping with amusement, as if they were old acquaintances. The satisfaction in his eyes was unmistakable. He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, exuding arrogance and provocation. Elijah locked eyes with him instantly. He could see it in Greggs's gaze. This wasn't a casual meeting. Greggs had done his homework. He knew Elijah's name, his face, his history, and, most importantly, what had happened to Martha. "I have to admit," Greggs sneered, "your military record is impressive. Silver Star for that rescue mission in Syria. A real war hero, huh? Too bad this isn't the Middle East. This is Atlanta." Elijah knew Greggs had been digging deep. Mentioning the rescue mission with that sneer was no accident. It was a weapon meant to provoke. But what unsettled Elijah most wasn't the mockery. It was the cold certainty in Greggs' eyes. Like a chess master who'd already calculated every move Elijah might make. "This isn't a confrontation you fear," Elijah thought. "It's one you've prepared for." Greggs smirked again, disdain thick in his voice. "I heard your mother needed money for surgery. $4,200, right? She must be so proud to know her son is dumb enough to walk into a police station demanding it back." Elijah forced himself to remain still, muscles coiled beneath his skin. Greggs' words were poison, designed to sting, to provoke, to make him lose control. But Elijah wouldn't bite. Clenching his fist, voice even and steady, he replied, "I'm not here for your insults. Give my mother back what you stole, or face the consequences." Greggs threw his head back and laughed, loud, exaggerated, making sure the entire station heard. Greggs's gaze flickered toward his fellow officers, a predator asserting dominance in his den. "You hear that? This guy thinks he makes the rules now," he sneered, voice dripping with contempt. "Maybe the military spoiled you too much, huh, Cole? Now you think you can bring your battlefield justice into my station." Around them, murmurs stirred. Some officers exchanged cautious glances, uncertain but wary. Greggs wasted no time spinning the story, shaping the narrative in his favor. His next words came closer, low enough for Elijah alone to hear, but loud enough to echo through the room. "Listen carefully, Cole. I know exactly what kind of man you are, a worthless black soldier who got a free pass because of some diversity quota. You think just because you carried a rifle in the Middle East you can come back here and tell us how to do our jobs? This is Atlanta. We are the law." From the moment Elijah stepped inside, Greggs had set the trap. This wasn't just intimidation. It was a meticulously planned assault on Elijah's reputation, his very identity. Greggs wanted more than to break him. He wanted to make Elijah a symbol of every stereotype society feared. The violent black man, the thug who attacked the police. If Elijah lost control, struck first, Greggs would have all he needed. A Green Beret assaulting an officer in Zone 3 police precinct? The headlines would explode, the narrative twisted and amplified. A criminal in uniform, a threat to public safety. Greggs had seen it happen before. Black men lured into confrontation, then painted as the aggressors by carefully edited video clips stripped of context. That image was everything. Greggs hadn't chosen this battleground by accident. His audience was his brothers in blue. Officers conditioned to cover for each other, willing to fabricate false reports to protect one of their own. If Elijah was arrested, they'd say he was the aggressor, that he threatened law enforcement. And if the situation escalated, Greggs could claim self-defense. A trained soldier, a Green Beret, turned into a dangerous, uncontrollable weapon. The label would shatter Elijah's truth. But above all, Greggs wanted to make it personal. This was a message not just to Elijah, but to the entire black community. No matter the hard work, no matter the heroism, no matter the sacrifices, men like Greggs would always hold the power. This wasn't just physical domination. It was the crushing of dignity, the erasure of hope. Elijah met Greggs' gaze, seeing every piece of the trap laid bare. He felt the weight of every eye in the station, all watching, waiting for him to slip. One wrong move, one raised hand, and it would be over. His mother's pain would drown in the chaos, and he'd become exactly what Greggs wanted him to be. But Elijah knew better. To win this fight, he couldn't fall into the bait. He stepped out of Zone 3 police precinct, fists clenched tight at his sides. The fire inside him burned, but control reigned. Greggs had orchestrated a corner, a trap with no easy escape. But Elijah was no stranger to traps. He had survived battlefields where a single misstep cost lives. Patience was his weapon. Darkness swallowed the streets of Atlanta as Elijah walked, his mind racing through every angle. He needed a plan. Information, a way to strike at the roots of the system Greggs hid behind. Suddenly, a sleek black car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, revealing a familiar face. "Get in, Cole." It was Lieutenant Marcus Carter. Unlike the others at the precinct, Carter was one of the few holding on to integrity in a corrupt system. Elijah had heard of him back in the military, a man who hadn't been swallowed by the swamp of rot, someone quietly fighting from within. Elijah hesitated only briefly before opening the door and sliding inside. Carter didn't speak right away. The car moved through quiet streets, streetlights casting golden streaks on the windows. When they reached an empty parking lot, Carter cut the engine and turned to face Elijah. "I know what happened to your mother," Carter said, his voice heavy with unspoken truths. "And I know you're not the kind of man to just let it go." Elijah crossed his arms, waiting. "Good," Carter said, then cut to the chase. "What do you want?" Elijah asked. Carter exhaled slowly, cautious but sincere. "I want you to stay smart." He paused, eyes steady. "Greggs and O'Reilly, they're scum. But they're not just rogue cops. They have a whole system protecting them." Elijah narrowed his eyes. "A system," Carter confirmed. "Gregg isn't just some dirty cop. He's connected, deep connections, people with power who've covered for him all these years. He's not just a thug who robbed an old woman in the street. He's part of something much bigger." Elijah sat quietly, letting the pieces fall into place in his mind, as Carter leaned in, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "There's something else," Carter said. "Greggs isn't planning to let you take this any further. He knows you won't stop. So he's hiring people, professionals, to take you out before you get the chance." Elijah wasn't surprised. He'd seen tactics like this before. Back in the war, men like Greggs never fought head-on if they could strike from the shadows. But what caught Elijah's attention was who Carter described. Not street-level thugs, but a team of seasoned professionals. Carter's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Greggs knows who you are, how you've been trained. He's not sending amateurs. He wants you gone clean. An accident, a misunderstanding, a body no one will question." Elijah clenched his jaw but kept his composure. "Good," he said quietly. "That means he's afraid." Carter studied him closely. "Don't you get it, Cole? This isn't just about getting your mother's money back anymore. This is a war. Elijah's gaze drifted out the windshield to the waking streets of Atlanta. Carter was right, this had become far bigger than justice. It was a fight against a system that would kill to protect its power. Turning back, Elijah's eyes burned with resolve. "You're right. I can't play by Greg's rules. They're designed to twist the truth. But if he thinks I'll let him walk away, he's dead wrong." Carter shook his head, a faint chuckle escaping. "Exactly what they say. He doesn't back down." Elijah's voice lowered. "And I'm not fighting alone." Carter raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Elijah didn't answer. He opened the door and stepped out onto the pavement. Looking back once, he said with cold certainty, "Greg thinks he's the hunter. I'm about to show him who the real predator is." The night swallowed Elijah's figure as he disappeared into the shadows. Carter watched, a chill crawling down his spine. This war had only just begun. Atlanta's streets lay quiet under the cloak of night, but beneath that calm, chaos was stirring. Greg's wasn't waiting anymore. He knew Elijah was dangerous, not just for his military skills, but for his unyielding spirit. Greg's needed to act fast, cleanly, before Elijah struck. He didn't trust street thugs or low-level enforcers. He needed experts, men who made problems vanish without a trace. 5 men sat inside an unmarked black SUV, parked a block from Elijah's apartment. They spoke little, checking weapons and exchanging nods. Professionals who'd been here before. Accidents, disappearances, bodies never found. Routine work. Their leader, known only as Vance, was a former mercenary who'd traded the deserts of the Middle East for America's shadows. His voice was a low growl as he keyed his radio. "Target's a special forces operative. Not easy, but not impossible. Quick, clean, no traces." The team fanned out, surrounding the neighborhood. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps give light to voices that deserve to be seen and heard. Then, without warning, the entire street plunged into darkness. Every street lamp, every window, every neon sign snuffed out like a candle in the wind. Inside the SUV, Vance's body tensed. They'd scouted the area before. There were no electrical faults. "This isn't an accident," he muttered. A shadow darted past, too fast to follow. Then a scream tore through the silence. Vance spun around, but one of his men was gone. No struggle, no gunfire, just vanished. The remaining 4 felt a cold dread settle deep in their bones. "He's hunting us," one whispered, hands trembling around his weapon. Vance hissed, "Spread out, don't get boxed in." But before they could react, another scream shattered the night. Another man was gone. No signs of Elijah, no sounds of battle, only the overwhelming presence of something unseen stalking in the darkness. Tonight, the hunters had become the hunted. Panic exploded. "Shoot! Shoot!" one screamed, firing wildly into the void. Gunfire echoed through the empty streets, not aimed at an enemy, but at fear itself. Vance gritted his teeth. His instinct screamed. This wasn't a simple hit. This was urban guerrilla warfare. Elijah wasn't running. He was using the city itself as a weapon, isolating, dismantling, picking them off one by one. Desperation crept into Vance's voice as he radioed Greg's, who monitored from a nearby safe house. "We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" Greg's asked, tension creeping into his voice. "This guy isn't running. He's hunting us." There was a long pause before Gregis answered, his voice tight with fear. "If you thought he'd run like a scared little boy, you were dead wrong. He's turned this whole block into a goddamn war zone. I've lost 2 men already, and we haven't even seen his face." Greggs clenched his jaw, fingers tightening around his phone. The plan was unraveling. Elijah wasn't just resisting, he was controlling the battlefield. Vance panted, pressed back against a crumbling brick wall, eyes darting through the suffocating darkness. The silence around him was thick, almost alive, broken only by his ragged breaths. Then a whisper, ice-cold, slithered right into his ear. "Do you hear that?" Before he could react, an iron grip seized his throat, dragging him into the shadows. 5 minutes later, the streetlights flickered back to life. The survivors, few and shaken, stood trembling in the middle of the street. Weapons lay scattered, useless at their feet. Some were bound to lampposts, mouths gagged, eyes wide with terror. Vance lay unconscious, face swollen from a brutal blow. Opposite him, smeared on the brick wall in the blood of one fallen mercenary, was a chilling message. "I know who sent you." When Greggs received the call, his hands shook uncontrollably. For the first time in his life, he tasted true fear, the cold, suffocating feeling of being hunted. The night wind wound through Atlanta's narrow alleys, carrying the damp scent of aged brick and decay. Greg stood rigid, gripping his Glock tighter, eyes frantically scanning every shadow. The assassins he'd hired were gone, no bodies, no screams, no trace. Powerless, completely exposed. Greggs was used to control, to fear bending before him, but now a cold dread crept along his spine. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. Snatching up his radio, he forced his voice steady. "Vance, anyone copy? Report? Now." Only static answered. His pulse pounded as he spun on his heel, sprinting for his patrol car. But when he reached out to open the door, the car door was ripped from its hinges like a hurricane had struck. Greg stumbled back, wide-eyed and shocked. From the darkness stepped Elijah Cole. His face flickered in the pale streetlight. Calm, collected, utterly in control. No rage, no haste. The predator savoring the final moments before the kill. "You like hunting people, don't you, Greggs?" Elijah's voice sliced through the air like a razor. Greg swallowed hard, hands trembling as he raised his gun. "Back off, you have no right." Elijah took a slow, deliberate step forward, unfazed. "I think you're the one with no right." Greggs roared and pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet tore through the air, but Elijah was gone. Silence. Greg spun wildly, breath ragged, eyes darting to every shadow. No one moved that fast, no one. "You missed," a whisper came, right behind him. Before Greggs could turn, a fist like a sledgehammer crashed into his ribs. He gasped, staggering backward, barely upright. Pain exploded through his body, but there was no time to recover. A second blow slammed into his jaw, whipping his head into the patrol car. Stars burst in his vision as he gasped for air, sweat mixing with cold terror. He fumbled for his gun, but a vice-like grip locked his wrist and twisted. Greggs howled in agony as the weapon tumbled to the pavement. Before he could call for help, a crushing force slammed him against the hood of his own car, pinned, defenseless. Leaning close, Elijah's voice dropped, deadly and calm. "How many people have you done this to, Greggs?" Greggs thrashed weakly, but Elijah's grip tightened, and for the first time in his life, Greggs felt his own spine creak under pressure. "You really thought you'd never pay for it?" Greggs wheezed, panic clawing his throat. This was fear. The real kind. Elijah reached inside his jacket. A flash of steel caught the streetlight, the glint of a knife. The blade gleamed wickedly sharp, reflecting Greg's trembling face. The cold edge barely brushed his throat, just a whisper of steel against skin. "What do you think I'm going to do next?" Greggs's lips trembled. "Please," he choked, voice breaking. Elijah tilted his head, considering. Then, in an instant, he pulled back. Greggs gasped, lungs heaving, blinking up at Elijah in dazed confusion. Elijah bent down, picked up the fallen gun, ejected the magazine, and tossed both into a nearby storm drain. His gaze was ice, delivering a message sharper than any blade. "I'm not you, Greggs." Greggs stared as Elijah turned and disappeared into the night. For the first time in his life, Greggs knew every shadow, every creak in the dark, every whisper in the night would carry one name: Elijah Cole. Greggs slumped onto the freezing pavement, back against his dented patrol car. His breath came in ragged, uneven gasps, like a drowning man barely clawing to the surface. The pain from the blows throbbed through his ribs, but what truly made him tremble was Elijah's eyes. Days that needed no threats or shouts, yet carved an irreversible fear deep into his mind. A predator who knew the prey was already conquered. Greg swallowed hard, struggling to steady himself. Then Elijah calmly pulled his phone from his pocket. "You think this is finished, Griggs?" Elijah's voice was steady, carrying the weight of a sentence already passed. Griggs didn't answer. What could he say? "I don't need to kill you," Elijah continued, stepping closer. "I don't need to dirty my hands with a piece of trash like you. I just need the world to see who you really are." He activated the camera, angling it toward Greg's. Start talking." Greg squinted, his breath hitching for a moment before defiance flared in his eyes. "You're insane if you think I'll destroy myself over some video," he spat, forcing out a hollow chuckle as he clung to the last shreds of confidence. But before he could steady himself, Elijah crouched, his hand latching firmly onto Greggis's throat. Not enough to knock him out, but just enough to remind him of the razor-thin line between life and death. "Greggs," Elisa's voice was low and deadly, "do you think I asked twice?" Greggs's eyes bulged, the pressure tightening, each second stealing away his breath. The suffocating fear wasn't from the grip itself, it was the look in Elijah's eyes. This was a man who knew exactly what he was capable of, and if it came down to it, he wouldn't hesitate. Greggs thrashed weakly, but it was useless. His throat locked up. His vision swam as oxygen slipped away. Elijah's grip never wavered. "You wanted to play power games? Fine." Elijah lifted the phone higher, voice steady. "What do you think happens if I upload this video?" Greggs clenched his teeth, still resisting. But after a few agonizing seconds, reality crashed down, the truth he'd tried to deny. This wasn't a bluff. It could all end here. A sharp strike to his collarbone forced a desperate breath from Greggs's lungs. Elijah leaned in, voice a whisper sharper than any scream. "There won't be anywhere left for you. The police? They'll throw you under the bus to save themselves. The criminals? They'll use you to burn down the whole department." He paused, eyes cold. "And you think you can run? Trust me, Greggs, if I want to make you disappear, no one will ever find your body." Greg's mouth opened, but no words came. Elijah's gaze swept the empty street. "There's no one coming to help you." And then mercifully he loosened his grip just enough for Greg to collapse into a coughing fit, lungs clawing for air like he'd been pulled from the abyss. "You have two choices, Greggs," Elijah said, voice razor sharp. "One, confess right now, on camera. Or two, I tell this story my way, and trust me, you won't like how it ends." Greggs trembled, staring into the phone's lens, knowing the fight was over. His hands shook as he swallowed hard, finally beginning to speak. "My name is Travis Greggs. I am an officer of the Atlanta Police Department, Zone 3. Elijah held the camera steady, silent but unwavering. "I have abused my power," Greggs confessed, voice cracking. "I stole money from an innocent woman. I fabricated charges to cover my crimes." Each word was a knife twisting in his throat, but he knew. If he didn't say them, he wouldn't exist much longer. "I also hired hitmen to kill Elijah Cole." Elijah's head tilted slightly, the ghost of a cold smile playing on his lips. "Keep going, Greggs." Greggs clenched his jaw, eyes closed tight, as if driving a blade into his own chest. "I have used my badge to harm and destroy the lives of people I look down on." His fists clenched tighter. "I didn't do it just for the money. I did it because I believed people like them didn't deserve the same rights as me." The moment Greg's confession went public, Atlanta ignited. Videos, evidence, and leaked internal documents flooded the internet. Proof of Greg's brazenly robbing Martha Cole. Audio recordings of him orchestrating harassment and violence against black citizens. Reports showing how his investigations had been buried. Everything was now public. The system that shielded him for so long suddenly had no defenders. Greggs became the face of corruption in the Atlanta Police Department. Reporters swarmed Zone 3 precinct, pressing superiors for answers, forcing the scandal into the spotlight. But worse than the media storm was the silent betrayal of his fellow officers. No one wanted to be associated with the man now branded as the city's disgrace. Greg spiraled into panic. His power gone, his safety net torn away. His name became toxic, a stain everyone wanted to scrub clean. Once untouchable, he was now a discarded pawn, abandoned the moment he became a liability. He knew that staying meant the walls would close in, investigations, charges, prison, the place men like him dreaded most. With no options left, Greggs resigned that very night. No termination, no subpoena, just quietly packing his belongings and walking out of the precinct. His steps heavy beneath the weight of every stare. No one spoke, no one said goodbye. He wasn't a cop anymore, just a man running from his sins. He drove out of Atlanta under the cover of darkness. No destination, no plan. Just a desperate need to be anywhere but here before the walls caved in completely. But deep down, Greggs knew there was nowhere left to run. In a quiet corner of the city, Elijah sat on the old wooden porch of his mother's house. He wasn't surprised by the news. Greggs's resignation and escape had always been inevitable. Once the city turned against him, there was no other path. But this wasn't the end of the fight. Greggs was a symptom, not the disease. The system had protected, nurtured, and enabled him for years. Atlanta could breathe a little easier with him gone. But as long as men like Greggs believed they could act without consequence, the cycle would never break. Across town, Ethan O'Reilly sat alone in a dim apartment. An empty liquor bottle rolled across the table. Greggs's downfall was everywhere, every news channel, every article.
Once arrogant, once untouchable, Greggs was now a name whispered with disgust. O'Reilly knew Greggs had run. Part of him believed that was all he could do, but another part, the part that haunted him every night, knew something worse. Greggs was gone, but O'Reilly was still here. He'd never been strong, never the frontline fighter. He was the scavenger, circling behind predators, feeding off leftovers. When Greggs had yanked the envelope of cash from Martha Cole's hands, O'Reilly had said nothing. When Greggs shoved her to the ground, he had only watched. He never committed the crime himself, but now silence weighed on him like a verdict. He was just as guilty. His phone vibrated, a number he didn't recognize. He ignored it. The nightmare of that night haunted him. Elijah Cole's arrival at Zone 3, his presence alone was enough to unravel Greggs, to dismantle what should have been unbreakable. O'Reilly remembered the frantic call from Greggs that night, his voice panicked, trapped, realizing escape was impossible. O'Reilly swallowed hard. Elijah hadn't killed Greggs, but that didn't mean Elijah would spare him. He rose abruptly, moving to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to glimpse the street below. He saw the city moving as usual. Cars passing, streetlights flickering, nothing seemed out of place. But he couldn't shake the feeling, somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching. It had been 3 days since Greggs vanished, and O'Reilly had never felt more on edge. At the precinct, no one spoke to him like they used to. Colleagues who once exchanged nods now avoided his gaze as if he carried a curse. The unspoken respect, the silent approval, was gone. Now, every time he entered a room, conversations died. He was no longer the hunter, he was the prey. The thought of running crossed his mind more than once. Pack up, leave Atlanta, start fresh somewhere else. But one thing stopped him. Greggs had run. No one knew where. No one even knew if he was alive. O'Reilly refused to become the next Greggs. So he chose to live in the shadows of his own fear. He called in sick, refused to set foot in the station. Locked his doors, avoided all contact, distanced himself from anything that might pull him back into the spiral that consumed Greggs. But fear isn't something you can lock behind four walls. It seeped into his mind, woke him at night with cold sweat. He dreamed of being dragged into a dark alley, unseen hands tightening around his throat. And when he looked up, Elijah Cole was there, not with rage, not with hatred, but with the silent, unshakable stare of a man who cannot be stopped. He began avoiding the streets he once patrolled, switched grocery stores, found new bars, changed his routines. But no matter how much he ran, he knew one day Elijah would come for him. Time passed. To the world, things seemed to settle. But for O'Reilly, peace would never return. No knocks at his door, no threatening calls, no followers, at least, none he could prove. But he knew Elijah was still out there, watching, waiting, and if O'Reilly ever slipped, made one misstep, Elijah would return. News of Greggs' downfall and mysterious disappearance spread like wildfire through Zone 3 and all across Atlanta. Officers who once thrived under the corrupt system now held their breath. No one knew where Greggs had gone. No one knew if he was even alive. And that uncertainty terrified them more than any trial ever could. On cold gray morning, as Zone 3 officers arrived for work, an unmarked brown envelope sat on the captain's desk. No one saw who placed it there. No one knew where it came from. Inside was a single sheet of paper. If you keep doing what Greggs did, I will come back. No fingerprints, no evidence, but the message was louder than any words. For years, Zone 3 had operated with impunity. Officers like Greggs and O'Reilly acted without fear, shielded by the system that protected them. But now, for the first time, the untouchables knew fear. The precinct's atmosphere grew heavy, tense with a weight never felt before. Officers who once laughed at victims like Martha Cole no longer found humor in cruelty. No one dared speak Greg's name, but it hung in the air like a warning. No one wanted to be next. Lieutenant Marcus Carter watched in silence. He didn't know if Elijah left the note himself, but he understood one thing: whether by words or fear, the message had taken root. Those who abused power would now think twice before laying a hand on the innocent. Carter picked up the note, reading it again, his expression unreadable. This wasn't justice in the traditional sense, but in a city riddled with rot, sometimes justice needed a steel hand to clear the way before anything new could be built. In a narrow alley just blocks away, a group of officers familiar with dirty work gathered in hushed voices, fear shining in their eyes. Murray slammed his fist on the table, voice tense with frustration. What the hell are we supposed to do? Greggs is gone. O'Reilly's hiding like a rat in the sewers. I'm not about to end up like them. Foster growled, "Calm down. This could be a scare tactic. We don't know for sure Elijah Cole's behind all this." Morales let out a bitter laugh. "You actually believe that? Who else could have done this? Everyone here knew what Greggs was up to, but only he got targeted." Those hired hitmen, they didn't just disappear by accident. The room grew, suffocating. No one wanted to admit it, but Elijah Cole wasn't someone they could handle.
He wasn't some street thug to beat down and bury under fabricated charges. He was a soldier, a man who had fought in real wars. But more importantly, he wasn't reckless. Foster swallowed hard, voice slow and heavy with truth. "We've got only one option now. Lay low, keep our heads down, no trouble. Nothing that puts us on his radar." Morales clenched his fists, pride burning beneath his skin. But deep down, he knew it was the only choice. They couldn't beat Elijah. He didn't play by their rules, and that made him more dangerous than any enemy they'd ever faced. For the first time they understood. They were no longer in control. Meanwhile, Elijah Cole stood silently on the rooftop of an old building, watching the city stretch out beneath him. The streetlights flickered below, the roads bustled as if nothing had changed. But they knew better. Something had shifted. Greggs was gone, O'Reilly too scared to show his face. The rest hesitated even if they hadn't been broken completely. Even if Elijah returned to the military, they'd always be looking over their shoulders. Atlanta had changed. The night was unnaturally quiet. No wailing sirens. No drunken laughter from men who once thought themselves untouchable. The city moved on, the world kept turning, but the shadows that had once loomed over certain streets had begun to thin. Elijah stepped through the creaking wooden door of the house where he grew up. The sound echoed softly in the stillness of the night. The warm scent of cinnamon and herbal tea drifted from the small kitchen, wrapping the air in comforting familiarity he hadn't felt in years. Martha Cole sat at the table, frail hands resting lightly on the worn wood. Her eyes never left her son. Elijah placed an envelope in front of her. No words were needed, The weight of it spoke for itself. The money, every last dollar she'd lost, had been returned. Martha stared at the envelope, then looked up at Elijah. Her expression held more than surprise. There was understanding, concern, the quiet wisdom of a mother who'd seen too much cruelty in the world. Her voice was soft but firm. "What did you do to get this back?" Elijah didn't answer immediately. He looked at the woman who had worked herself to the bone to raise him, the woman who never bowed to hardship. If he knew she wasn't naive, she wasn't one to accept pretty lies. But some truths were better left unknown. He smiled, a small, genuine smile. "You don't want to know." Martha exhaled, not pressing further. She already knew. Only a mother could tell. Justice didn't always come from courtrooms or badges, but from those willing to do what was necessary. They sat across from each other, hands clasped. No more words were needed. The silence between them was not heavy. It was understanding. Martha's surgery went ahead as scheduled. Elijah spent hours in the hospital hallway, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on the glowing light above the operating room doors. He had never been the kind to believe in fate or gods. But this time he found himself praying, a child's prayer long forgotten. Finally, the doctor stepped out, pulling down his mask, a reassuring smile lighting his face. The surgery was a success. Elijah closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax just a little. Not because men like Greg's had disappeared. Not because he had sent a message to Zone 3. But because the one person who could still make him feel like a child, his mother, was going to live. He stepped into the hospital room. Martha lay there, eyes heavy with exhaustion, but lips curled into a soft smile the moment she saw him. Elijah sat beside her, gently taking her hand. "I'm here," he said.
Martha said nothing. She simply squeezed his hand, her way of telling him she knew. She didn't need to worry anymore. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm, different, not the same, but one Elijah could accept. He stayed by his mother's side, helping her recover. They took slow walks through their quiet neighborhood, which somehow felt a little more peaceful. He knew men like Greg's would eventually be replaced by others. The world would never truly be rid of those who abused power. But he also knew sometimes even the smallest action could tip the scales. Rumors of Greg's downfall and the mysterious warning letters spread. No one could say for certain Elijah was behind it all. But everyone understood. Things had changed. The old order was broken. Those officers who once laughed as they bent the law to their will were no longer so bold. Atlanta, still far from perfect, had shifted, even if only a little. One quiet evening, Elijah sat on the porch, watching the street before him. Martha came out with 2 cups of herbal tea. She set one in front of him and settled beside him. "Do you think they'll come back?" Elijah took a sip of tea, warmth spreading through him. He looked at his mother, then at the golden glow spilling from small windows, at the people who could now live without bowing their heads to men like Greg's. He smiled faintly, setting his cup down. "Oh, they know better now." Martha nodded, satisfied. She didn't know exactly what Elijah had done, but she knew one thing. He was still here. And for her, that was enough. Elijah Cole's story wasn't just about reclaiming justice for his mother. It was a warning to those who thrived on unchecked power. A man who once sought only to protect his family had become the nightmare of the untouchable. The fall of Greg's and the ghost that haunted O'Reilly had changed Atlanta in ways no one predicted. But the real question remained: had justice truly been restored? Or would others rise to take Greg's place, continuing the cycle of corruption? Thank you for watching this story of courage, resilience, and the unyielding power of justice. In a world that can sometimes feel dark and unfair, it's the kindness we show, the compassion we hold, and the small acts of bravery that light the way forward. Remember, change often begins with one voice standing up, one hand reaching out, and one heart refusing to give up. If this story touched you, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing so we can continue to bring you more stories that inspire and remind us all of our shared humanity. As the poet Maya Angelou once said, try to be a rainbow in someone's cloud. Let's keep spreading that light together.